Good afternoon. My name is Brad Ray, and I'm the Lake Superior Fisheries Team Supervisor for Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. And today I'm going to briefly talk about the past, present, and future of fisheries management in the Apostle Islands. Fisheries has been an important part of the local area for a long time. Native Americans were the first to settle the area, and in the early 1800s were part of the American Fur Company in La Pointe, shipping salted lake whitefish and lake trout packed in barrels to Sault Ste. Marie. But by the middle of the 18th century, markets had reduced and fishing was less of an industry until European settlers resumed fishing, and by 1880, employed over 200 in Bayfield, and increased technology improved harvest efficiency. The Bayfield State Fish Hatchery was built in 1897 and provided lake trout for Lake Superior. Although stocking was a common management tool that continued through subsequent decades, concerns grew over high fishing pressure, which fueled a conservation ethic among public officials and the public. This prompted a hiring of a warden in 1879 and the establishment of fishing regulations in the late 1800s. Aside from stocking, early fisheries management included regulations on commercial fishing through size limits, mesh restrictions, and seasons. Monthly commercial catch reports have been required since 1936 and allow us to observe the decline in fisheries. And by the time the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore was established, the major fisheries had collapsed. Lake trout in the top right dropped from 600,000 pounds in the 1940s to under 50,000 pounds in the 1960s. Cisco, or lake herring in the bottom left here, dropped from 6 million pounds in the 1940s to less than 200,000 pounds by the 1970s. And lake whitefish harvest peaked about 800,000 pounds in 1949 and was just over 200,000 pounds by the 1970s. As these declines were happening, the first fish manager was assigned to Lake Superior in 1951 and concentrated first on monitoring fish stocks and then on sea lamprey control. The drops in fisheries were due to continued overfishing and the introduction of the invasive species, specifically a new top predator in the sea lamprey, pictured here. During the peak of sea lamprey abundances, indicated by the line in the figure here, the overfished lake trout, the gray bars, were further reduced and led to the collapse. And to make matters worse, the altered food web and the overfished Cisco populations allowed for colonization of another invasive species, rainbow smelt, which further interfered with the delicate ecosystem and suppressed native fisheries through competition and predation. These changes led fisheries management to focus on reducing sea lamprey numbers and restoring lake trout by reducing the effect of overfishing through implementation of harvest regulations. This three-pronged approach has been successful, and efforts to reduce sea lamprey and implementation of harvest regulations, coupled with protection of spawning habits, with the formation of the Gull Island Refuge in 1976 and the Devil's Island Refuge in 1981, seen in this map on the left, led to an increase in natural reproduction and better survival of lake trout, this slow-growing, long-lived fish. Arguably, the refuge complexes were the main driver of the resurgence of lake trout, not only in Wisconsin, but all of Lake Superior. Prohibiting harvest of lake trout near the spawning habitat allowed for what is now considered a restored population in Lake Superior, as can be seen in the figure on the right, with the abundance of lake trout on Gull Island Shoal since 1951. During this time, during the 70s, the protection of that habitat as the formation of the Apostle Island National Lakeshore was happening, and fisheries managers were working with protecting these habitats. The levels increased to what we see since the 90s and has been consistent, and that has led to the cessation of stocking since 1995 in the Apostle Island region. The continued success of lake trout restoration also relied on continued harvest control. And one way that is done is with the Lake Superior Fishing Agreement between the state of Wisconsin, Red Cliff, and Bad River bands of Lake Superior Chippewas. After the Gurno decision in 1972, the Lake Superior Chippewas reaffirmed treaty right and were allocated 50% of the safe harvest limits. The state and the tribes have agreed that negotiating the terms of fisheries management in Wisconsin waters of Lake Superior benefits each of the parties to a greater degree than an alternative to such an agreement. This document outlines the process for how the State Tribal Technical Committee evaluates stock status, which leads to recommendations for total allowable harvest quotas. The document also spells out how the quotas are divided amongst the three parties. Seasons, tagging, lake trout stocking, walleye quotas, enforcement, home use fishing, and information exchange are all described in the agreement. Additionally, the agreement identifies areas of collaboration between the three parties, including joint law enforcement patrols, joint commercial monitoring activities, and data sharing procedures, along with a defined biological committee that meets at least 3 times a year to discuss sustainability of the resource. The current agreement was recently renegotiated and terminates on November 27th, 2028, if not reaffirmed or renegotiated. One of the aspects of the Lake Superior Fishing Agreement is establishing a safe harvest limit for lake trout in Wisconsin waters, which for the Apostle Islands area has been done with a statistical catch at age model that uses fishery dependent and independent data to calculate a total allowable catch. This figure shows the total allowable catch for the Apostle Islands area over the last 35 years. The statistical catch at age model is used to estimate fishery harvest, abundance, recruitment, mortality, gear selectivity, catchability, and fishery independent assessment catch per unit effort for wild lake trout of ages 4 to 15 plus. To calculate a total allowable catch recommendation for each fishing season, lake trout abundance is projected forward using average values from the most recent years for age 4 abundance, natural mortality, sea lamprey mortality, recreational fishing mortality, and commercial fishing selectivity. The total allowable catch is based on the annual mortality of 40% on the age of maximum commercial selectivity. In order to obtain data needed for the population model, we manage the commercial fishery in 3 main ways: onboard monitoring of state and tribal fishers, mandatory commercial fishing reporting, and through biological data collected during our own fishery independent annual surveys. Restrictions to commercial fishing are determined by onboard monitoring. The season for lake whitefish and lake trout is November 28th through September 30th the following year. This is divided into 3 periods. During each of these 3 periods, a catch per unit effort is determined through joint onboard monitoring. The goal is to monitor every boat that fishes at least once and 7% of the total large mesh gill net effort. The monitored catch per unit effort is used to set a 3-year rolling average to set the allowable footage of large mesh gill net effort based on the total allowable catch. The effort limitation was implemented in 1991. And since implementation, the primary target of commercial fishing, lake whitefish in the bottom right, harvest has increased, while lake trout, the top right, harvest has remained consistent, showing management has been successful. Recent changes in market conditions has led to an observed increase in Cisco in the bottom left, and will be talked about a little bit later. Just to put the recent catches in perspective to harvest before the collapse, with lake trout again on the top right, we have regulated harvest to keep harvest from reaching the highs seen in the 1940s and have successfully restored the population. Whitefish in the bottom right is now the major target of the industry, with the average harvest between 2010 and 2019 just over 1 million pounds annually. The increase aligns with the implementation of effort control in 1991, which protects lake trout, but has also protected whitefish populations from overharvest. Cisco populations in the bottom left currently are on par with whitefish harvest, but populations still have not reached the pre-1950s levels. Lake Superior is a multi-use fishery, and management also needs to focus on sport fishers. With the use of length and bag limits, closed seasons, gear restrictions, the same refuge system as commercial fishers, and we monitor the sport fishery through creel surveys. The Apostle Islands attracts anglers for more than just world-class fisheries ranging from lake trout to smallmouth bass. For the issue of time, though, I will leave sport fish management to this, but do encourage you to visit the Lake Superior DNR webpage for more information. We also conduct fishery independent assessments to gather information for management of both sport and commercial fisheries. Since 1970, the research vessel Hacknoise has served as the backbone of the fisheries program on Lake Superior for Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. The Hack covers the entirety of Wisconsin waters, as indicated by the numbers that represent each sample location. The crew of the Hack collect biological data from fish with the use of gill nets, including length, sex, and age. The Hack conducts 5 surveys in Wisconsin waters. These and other surveys conducted by the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources are an integral part of the management of fish populations and sustainability of the fishery in Wisconsin waters of Lake Superior. For example, the spring survey is used to monitor lake trout and whitefish populations. The figure on the left indicates how since 1980, the number of hatchery lake trout, the top left, has decreased, while the number of naturally reproduced lake trout, the bottom left here, has increased. Data like this led to the decision in 1995 to eliminate lake trout stocking in the Apostle Islands. This survey is also useful for monitoring the sea lamprey wounding rates, which the figure on the bottom right here shows the lake trout in the Apostle Islands are below the established goal of 5 marks per 100 fish for Lake Superior, indicated by the dashed line, and shows the effectiveness of sea lamprey control in the Apostle Islands area. But management challenges are still present. Recently, Cisco, the native prey fish, has seen lake-wide decreases in abundance and biomass since the early 2000s. As you can see from the suite of Cisco species here, the bloater, the Cisco, and the Kai, this USGS figure shows that in 2003 to 2016, there's been a decrease in abundance as well as biomass of these prey species. The decline in Cisco are similar to other species on a lake-wide scale. Looking at further USGS data in 2011, the yellow bars, and 2016, the blue bars, you can see the decline in numerous species between those 2 time periods. And due to the multiple years that the USGS used to monitor fish populations, the declines are most likely attributed to predation by the restored lake trout populations, coupled with recruitment declines. From the USGS annual bottom trawl survey that effectively captures H1 Cisco, we can see that year classes are sporadic and variable in Lake Superior. Each bar represents a year class and shows that in the 80s and early 90s, there was substantially higher year classes than we've seen since 2003, which was the last relatively strong year class. These year classes can also be followed through the commercial fishery. The figure on the right shows the proportion of each age class caught in the commercial fishery each year since 2007. And the colors represent the year classes in the figure on the left. So in 2007, you can see that the highest proportion of fish that were caught in the commercial fishery were from the green or the 1998 year class. But there was still a good proportion in the brown or the 2003 year class. These year classes, the 1998, the green, and the 2003 year class, the brown, were the predominant year classes between 2007 and 2011. But as those fish left the population, the much smaller 2009 year class, the red, became the predominant fishery in the commercial fishery. And recently, we've seen the 2014 year class become a major portion of the fishery in the yellow. Additionally, the Cisco commercial harvest has increased since 2008 due to a market change where average annual harvest between 2000 and 2007 was just over 350,000 pounds. And since 2008, average annual harvest has been over 1 million pounds. The declines in Cisco and the increased harvest led fisheries management to implement harvest quota in 2016 and updated it for 2021, incorporating the most recent population estimates and applying the total harvest limit to all parties in an effort to sustain Cisco population. The current quota that's in effect for all three parties is just under 1.8 million pounds, and this will be evaluated every 3 years as new information comes available. Problems with Cisco recruitment can be dealt with harvest control rules, but other threats are still present. The Apostle Islands are near the largest shipping port in Lake Superior, and shipping has been one of the pathways for introduction of aquatic invasive species. We've already talked about the effects of sea lamprey that were able to migrate to Lake Superior due to the locks and canals, but other aquatic invasive species have caused changes to the ecosystem, such as the spiny water flea, quagga and zebra mussels, Eurasian ruff, have been established and have altered food webs. At least 180 species have altered the ecosystem in the Great Lakes, and new aquatic invasive species could further disrupt the ecosystem. Additionally, changes in habitat caused by shoreline development, fragmentation, and sedimentation from land use practices and climate change will continue to alter the ecosystem and challenge fisheries management, which is why we recently updated the Lake Superior Fisheries Management Plan to make sure we were prepared to continue to provide sustainable multi-use fisheries and deal with these emerging issues in the future. With that, I'd just like to offer to stay informed for Lake Superior Fisheries Management. You can subscribe to the Lake Superior Gov Delivery list. You can do this by searching Lake Superior from the DNR homepage and going to the bottom of the Lake Superior page to click the sign up to keep up to date on Lake Superior fishing issues link. With that, I'll take any questions and comments that were in the chat, and I will encourage you to connect with the DNR through the various media platforms. Thank you.